Hello everyone. I'm gonna share today how we test the GitLab VS Code extension, the workflow extension. Let me share my screen. And for people watching, you can just pause and scan this QR code. It will take you to this document. I'll make it a little bit larger. That's my presentation. What I'm gonna do, I saw Mark being interested in performance and profiling. That's not going to be on the menu today. We are going to be talking about testing with unit tests, integration tests, and end-to-end tests. Profiling is interesting. We've never had to do it because like the API calls that we are making to GitLab instance, they just overshadow everything in terms of performance. Like if you are making a call that takes 200 milliseconds to perform, the way how you walk your arrays or maps or trees, it just doesn't really matter. Not on a scale of the data set that we are working with. So without further ado, I'm going to start with discussing maybe a little bit of history and then go to unit tests. So we adopted the extension from its original owner, Fatih, 2000, I want to say 20. And then back then there was only unit tests there. And maybe one, like the example integration test that gets generated when you create a new extension from a template. And so we were deciding on the testing strategy on the go. And what we settled on is that most of the code is going to be tested with unit tests. And for that, we are using Jest. And we will have few tests that are doing like larger scope testing, which we called integration tests. I'm going to get to them in a minute, but the important distinction is that unit tests have this VS Code global mock. We are not actually using anything from VS Code runtime. So any calls to the VS Code, like when you say Windows show information message, when you want to show the little toast message, all of that it doesn't actually exist in our unit test environment, and it's all mocked out. The good thing about it is that the tests are really quick. The bad thing is we are not testing anything VS Code related. And then we've got integration tests. And for those, maybe the documentation for integration tests would be good to show. Here we've got, this is how the extension works in a production. You've got all these real world inputs like files in your workspace, the Git integration, the API, and what user clicks on or types in. And that gets into the extension and we show some UI changes. And the integration tests are cutting a lot of that out. And we have temporary workspace that's almost identical to normal workspace, but we do have, and the Git repository is also the same, but we are completely mocking out the API. That's probably the most important thing about our integration tests. We are using a library called mocked service worker that actually stubs out the HTTP plumbing in both Node and browser environments. And we have a recorded API responses, and we just provide those instead of making real API calls. And another important thing is that instead of having user actions actually triggering something, we are going a little bit step deeper. And if you imagine that user action calls, like user clicks somewhere and that triggers a command, our integration test would directly trigger the command. Or if user goes here in the VS Code extension and says, show me the issues assigned to me, instead of that, we would just directly call the issue provider that's underneath and check that the objects we get back are the same. So that's integration tests. They are testing the units integrated running in a real VS Code instance, but they are still not testing it as user would. And for that, we have end-to-end tests where I can't really speak to them that much, except for like it actually runs the real VS Code instance and uses WebDriver because VS Code is a um, Electron app. It uses WebDriver to actually do clicking and as user would and check and it's making real API calls. So I'll show a little bit of the code later, but it's a very new addition to our testing strategy, and I haven't had worked in it in anger. And so let's start with unit tests. The key part of our unit tests is that we use a lot of mocking. I dislike it so much. It just seems like that's the way how things are done in JavaScript in general. And so a lot of times you need to provide when you are, like, let's say you are testing an account service, and you would want to test that it integrates well with account API. And so the account API is supposed to return some objects. And instead of actually crafting the objects, you know that the account service only needs, let's say, a username. And that's where we are using this create fake partial helper. That's really useful if you want to write any tests, any tests for TypeScript in reality. That's our utility function that is defined here. And it pretty much just says, double check that what we are passing as an argument to it is a partial of the real thing. So let's say I'll show you an example. When we are saying here, create fake partial of response, this create fake partial utility function is going to ensure that response does have OK attribute, like it ensures that these properties could be part of a response. So if you would type in OK colon 500, that would fail because it would tell you, no, if you want to create a partial of response, it needs to be false. So that will give us as much of type safety as we can with as little hassle. It's really nice, especially coming from JavaScript when you can just pass in anything. It's really useful. We use it now in all the TypeScript projects, in language server, in web IDE, and in VS Code extension. Now, another thing to consider when you are writing unit tests, sort of in general, is this terrible decision that I've made years ago to make the most the services that are most common, make them as singletons that can be accessed from everywhere. It's like a first programming 101. Don't use singletons. Singletons are bad. But I was just thinking, no, there can't be any downsides. It's so easy to just import it like this from anywhere. The drawback is that it's very hard to test. We came up with one of the drawbacks. Another drawback is that when you are initializing it, it's hell. But from testing perspective, the two ways how to work around this is that either there is this just mock method when you can say, this whole imported module is going to be mocked and we provide this implementation instead. So that's one option. Or we do even better. We just override the property on the singleton, which is also working. Like it creates a little bit nicer to read code. It's probably worse in if we would be talking about code purity. None of this is particularly elegant or pleasant to work with, but these are the two ways, if you find a singleton in our app, how you can test them. The VS Code global mock trips a lot of people. It's completely implicit, comes out of nowhere. A lot of times you write a test and you figure out, there is this function that I know that should be on the VS Code in the VS Code API, and yet the tests are telling me that the mock, like the function doesn't exist. And then you go and ask in the Slack channel for VS Code extension, and then you learn that there is this global mock with all the VS Code APIs mocked like this, with a little bit of a extra like for URI, we do have extra implementation for URI and event emitter. It was really useful to make those actual working implementation instead of just mocks. There is also a library. It's called something like VS Code test mocks. Something like this could be. Can't find it now. Maybe this. I think this is, no, that's not it. Anyway, there is a library that we have considered using, which provides pretty much what this function does, but it didn't seem that it would be that much beneficial because there wasn't that much more code. The code wasn't tested, and so we decided to stick with our own. And then there are to finish off unit tests, there are two web views that we are using, and they have separate unit tests. They run in the CI, but most of the time, unless you are working on the web views, you don't come into contact with those. It's Vitest or just testing for Vue framework. And if you've ever done any Vue and Vue testing, there is no gotchas there. Example test, I'll show you. It's going to be best if I open it in IDE. How is it? Extension test. Here we go. So I'm just quickly going to walk you through. This is how unit test would look like. You mock the whole modules. You mock some parts, but the most important thing is, for example, here when you are working with VS Code. I can make it larger a little bit just for the sake of presentation. Here, when you are working with this VS Code commands, that's the global mock that I was talking about. When there was somewhere here we were mocking account service, I think. Let's have a look. Yeah, so this is the second example of working with singleton in tests, as I said. Here we just go and override whatever is the method on a singleton with this, with our own implementation. That's about it. Let's move on to integration tests. Yep. The integration tests, I explained that we are mocking out requests. It looks about like this. You say, just create a JSON endpoint, and that will create a mock for the path and response. This is the second part that I was talking about, that you, instead of the provider get children, that's exactly what you saw here when I said that we are not testing what pills we show here, but instead we test the underlying data provider. All right. Now, there are two ways how you can run these tests. You can either run them from VS Code or from command line. So from VS Code, it looks like this. On live demo, I'm curious whether it's going to work or not. But in VS Code, you can say here, run the integration tests. And that should go and start another window of, here we go. I think this is the one. And it just runs all the tests in there. Is it? Yeah, live demos. No, it starts another window, and then you see actually something happening in there. Like this, the integration tests are really fast. They finish in, I don't know, once they start the VS Code, they finish like in 15 seconds, 10 seconds. So the good thing about running them this way is that you can put a breakpoint anywhere in the integration test. So like, let's say you are definitely checking some issuable data provider. So there is going to be something like get children. If I put a breakpoint here and run the integration tests, it just works as you would expect. It stops on the breakpoint. That's very useful. The other way how you can run integration tests is from command line. That's how CI does it. Um, the, in that case, there is a little bit of a wrapper. It's called VS Code-test. It's a npm module, and then downloads the whole VS Code executable for your. Yeah, we stopped here. That's all I wanted to show. So the wrapper downloads the full executable and runs your tests in it. The way how integration tests run is interesting. There is a, let's see whether I can see it here. Yeah, so there is an argument that you give to VS Code, and you could do it from command line. You could just type in code -- extension tests path, and this is where it expects an index file. And if we just go to this desktop, let's have a look here. This desktop, and we are test integration, right? So there is an index file here, and that matches our integration index. It's exactly the same, and that starts Mocha test framework from scratch in the VS Code, and then runs the tests alongside it as another, I guess, process. And the interesting thing why I'm mentioning it is because we do have two extensions running in that integration test environment. This is how people feel when they see it. And the two tests are actually, or two VS Code extension instances. One is the one that runs from the ES-built bundle. And because the bundle is pretty much like the only thing that it exposes as its interface is activate method. And that's this extension activate, extension activate method. So this is the only thing that is exposed. Everything else is implementation detail you can imagine as immediately invoked function in JavaScript. And so you can't, like, even though there is account service and project repository and all the other units of code in there, they are not accessible. And so when we start this extension, we also have to start we are starting another version of the extension from the compiled TypeScript files. And this is something we could probably optimize eventually. But at the moment, there are actually two types of integration tests. And one is the one that runs only the code in a bundle. And that's very limited what we can do, because the only way how you can poke into the bundle is that you can send a command and check what effects it had on files. One good example of it would be this create snippet test. Create snippet test. And how you know that it doesn't do, like, it's not using the modules from within the extension, but it's using the extension bundle as a whole, is that we are not importing any extension code whatsoever here. And how we are testing it, we mock some endpoints, we create we expect that we will call some VS Code open command, and then we execute one command and verify that this was called. And this is all looking at the extension from the outside and not through the inside. Sorry for the technical details. I don't expect you to really understand it, but this is the one example of a test that is exercising this bundle. All the other ones are importing, let's say, account service or project repository, and those ones are using the compiled TypeScript sources. All right. So the example of MR review test would be the one that's actually looking into the insides of the extension. MR review test. This one's a little bit larger, mocking a lot of the MR endpoints to get merge requests. And then you would see GitLab project repository when we have a look where that's defined. That's using the one of the services that are within the extension. And the data provider, that's the data provider that powers this panel. And then instead of checking that, there are actual UI items, as I mentioned, you check what's the label of the GUI items. It's all looking into the code. And that gets us to end-to-end tests. I try to run them. Let's try to run them from here. So, and as they will run, I'll be talking about what they do. So npm run, and yeah, because I just need to do npm install, and then there is a separate folder with end-to-end tests where you need to run them from. I'll make it larger as well. First E2E, install, and then right. And that would download the VS Code binary if I haven't already downloaded it, starts the VS Code and actually does authenticate, probably fails on the fact that I don't have a token in my environment variable. Yep, that's exactly what it fails on. And the code looks like this. It's really nice because there is a library of, I mentioned it here. There is this WebDriver for VS Code, this npm module, which provides you with lots of utilities around, like, open this workbench panel, type in this, click on that. So that is really useful. I haven't written any end-to-end tests. I usually don't like them too much, but here are super useful because they are exercising the Duo features as well as some other. And I'll probably write some in the future. There are references here for everything that I said. And thank you for your attention. That was a nice 20-minute knowledge sharing, nice and sweet. That's all I've got, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Thomas. It was very useful. I have the first question is, like, what's our stance on integration and end-to-end test features coverage? Because I know I'm not certainly, and who is writing them, like those tests, because I know I'm certainly not, and I work on the VS Code extension from time to time. So
yeah, that's a good question. The integration tests. So the official, like, written strategy is that we should be writing a lot of integration tests. The lived experience is different. We write only unit tests. The reason I think for it is that when you start interacting with, you have to think a lot about where are going to be the boundaries of the like integrated unit that you are testing. And historically, I'm just doing it like recording the API calls by, like, making curl and then copy pasting the result into a file, then loading that file in tests. That's or thinking about how should I provision the Git repository to make the test possible. And that's a very tall order for someone to do as a part of their normal issue that they are working on. The developer experience is not good enough, or not that good, that people would be like seeing the value in writing the integration tests. I don't have a particular answer to it. I think that for certain things, like, for example, now we are writing we are adding a timeout feature, like the requests are going to be timing out, and that's perfect thing to test with integration tests. I'll write one, but otherwise, I'd be really, really keen if anyone else is going to try to go through the pain of writing integration tests and then come up with, like a 20 suggestions how to improve it, and we can start working on them. I think like I see the integration tests, they never fail, uh, except for when you introduce bug in a code, which is super cool. That's not the experience I have with unit tests. The unit tests are you start refactoring and they start failing even though you haven't done anything wrong except for change the shape of the code. So I think there is a huge value in integration tests, but we don't write them, and I don't have an answer except for let's try to write some.
Makes sense. Thank you. And yeah, I'll try to write some tests when I have time. But it's from my experience, it usually is the same times it takes to implement the feature, at least at the start.
Yeah, maybe I can just do like I can cover existing feature with a couple tests, and then because we are changing the behavior of existing, like the let's say duo features, and because we are changing the behavior of the duo features, it will be breaking the tests, and that will give everyone introduction into integration testing. Because now what's covered mainly with the integration tests is merge requests and snippets, and we don't work on those features, so we rarely break the tests and don't have to touch them. Okay, if nobody has any more questions, then I guess that's it. What do you say, Shaker?
I had one more question. So, for mocking, we are using we are using our own VS Code mock library, but it seems like a problem that every extension would face, right? Because basically you need some way to mock the APIs. So, what are others doing?
Same thing. Same thing
Okay.
that we do. And there is that one library that I think a lot of people are. Also, fun fact, uh, most of the extensions are not tested in like because the extensions are usually relatively small. Like of course when we are talking about Git lens or
Yeah.
GitHub pull request, those are tested well. But like the smaller extension where somebody just wrote an extension to parse ES built uh, output into the VS Code typed diagnostics, those are not going to be tested.
I see. But so GitLans, what do they do for GitLans?
Question. Let's have a quick look. Why not? We've got some times to, yeah, GitLans. I think I even have them in my supercharged. Here we go. So with tests, do they have tests alongside? There is no separate test directory, so I would assume that maybe
They have a
let's say,
test.
yeah, there is a test suite that looks like 4 files. Maybe they have mainly unit tests. Let's have a look what could be well tested. Git, remotes. I don't see that many tests, but maybe they are hidden somewhere in like a different folder. There is no
Um,
.test file here, so patches, images. Maybe they are not tested. Let's try the file search. No, just test. That's everything that has test in it. So proving my point that the extensions are not that tested.
Interesting.
Or maybe we
Yeah.
are like bad mouthing GitLance, and in reality they have like a whole different repository that's only
Yeah, it's
doing like a really really advanced
I
end-to-end
suspect
testing.
it
And
is.
yeah, probably. So let's just give the benefit of the doubt. It's probably tested somewhere else.
Yeah, they probably have some other way to test. Okay. I mean, but it feels like this is almost like a contribution we can make for VS Code testing library if it doesn't already exist, right?
There's the one. I'll find it.
It's so common to.
This be it. No, that's actually the extension that runs your Jest tests.
VS Code mock for Jest.
I think that's the one. Yeah, I think that, okay, I think that this is the library. Let's have a look. Source, VS Code, index. Yep. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is the library. So the reasons why we have decided not to was that it didn't have tests, almost any, if any. So a lot of the implementation that it was providing was untested, and that seemed like it's not a trade-off that was worth making. It also, like, it seems that it's live now, but I think there was like 2 years period when there was no commit to it. So yeah, and I think this is the most popular.
Okay.
You're right. I was thinking exactly the same thing. This is something that the VS Code core team could be providing, because everybody will want to test their, like, unit test their extensions.
And there's an official VS Code test package, right, which provides, or isn't there?
The VS Code dash test is the one that I talked about, that like downloads, it's for integration testing and downloads because they are not providing, like, when you are using, and it might have changed. My information is from like a year and a half ago when I last time used a generator for new extensions. But when you generate new extension, it only gives you like a template for integration tests. And for the integration tests, they have a good support, because there you don't have to mock the VS Code. You actually run the tests in VS Code, and the VS Code dash test. Or maybe npm. That is a nice little utility that lets you, with one script, it will download the binary, and it will do a few other things. So it provides you with this run test method, but apart from that, I don't think they provide like test helpers.
Okay, yeah. So maybe we can contribute that back, or add to VS Code Jest or something, if that's active.
Yeah.
Because there's so many APIs, and the APIs are changing all the time. It's like impossible to catch up, right? With all the, like, not that you have to have them for all the tests, but I'm just saying that the VS Code extension API keeps evolving, and we'll have to keep updating our tests to support them, right? So
yeah, I don't know I can't remember the name for stubs that are actually implement. Is it fakes? I think it might be fakes. The most common name for when you provide an implementation, like a dummy implementation of your of an API. And I think we do that for part of the API that I showed, but it would definitely benefit if we provide more of the fakes.
Sounds great. That sounds great.
Okay.
All right. With that, thank you everyone for joining. And thank you, Thomas, for a great enlightening session of how we should actually be writing this. Thank you. Bye.
Pleasure. All right.
Thank you.